I'm David Chen, 34, and I thought I knew everything about trust until the night my newborn son changed the color of my world forever. When I quietly asked my wife about our baby's darker complexion, a simple question born from confusion, not accusation, her explosive reaction shattered more than just the silence in our bedroom. The fury in her eyes, the way she clutched our child and screamed that I couldn't handle the truth, told me everything I needed to know. But what I discovered in the weeks that followed, about love, about family, and about the kind of man I really was, would transform both our lives in ways neither of us saw coming. If you've ever questioned everything you believed about trust and family, this story will show you that sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most profound truths. Let me take you back to when everything seemed perfect, when that framed wedding photo on our mantel represented nothing but pure joy and endless possibility. I was 26 when I met Jessica at Northwestern, both of us grinding through late nights in the architecture library. She was studying education, planning to teach elementary school, and I was captivated by her passion for shaping young minds. Our first date lasted 12 hours. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch into a walk along Lake Michigan. The walk into dinner. And dinner into the kind of conversation that makes you forget time exists. Jessica had this laugh that could fill a room, warm and genuine. The kind that made everyone around her smile without knowing why. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her future classroom, the bulletin board she'd create, the way she'd make every child feel seen and valued. I fell in love with her dreams before I fell in love with her, though looking back, maybe they were the same thing. We graduated together, moved in together, built a life together with the methodical precision I applied to my architectural blueprints. I landed a position at a prestigious firm designing sustainable office buildings, while Jessica taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary. Our wedding 3 years later felt like the natural culmination of everything we'd worked toward. A small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Oak Park, surrounded by sunflowers and the kind of laughter that makes you believe in forever. The photo from that day sits on our mantel even now. Jessica radiant in her grandmother's vintage dress, me beaming in my charcoal suit, both of us looking impossibly young and certain. Her dark hair was pinned up with small white flowers, and my arm was wrapped around her waist like I was afraid she might disappear if I let go. We looked like people who had never doubted anything, who believed love conquered all obstacles and that good intentions were enough to sustain a marriage. For 8 years, we built what everyone else saw as an ideal life. I made partner at my firm by 32, designing award-winning buildings that balanced environmental responsibility with aesthetic beauty. Jessica became the kind of teacher parents requested by name, the one who stayed late to help struggling students and spent her own money on classroom supplies. We bought a craftsman-style house in Evanston with a front porch and mature oak trees, the kind of place where we could imagine raising children and growing old together. Our financial stability felt unshakable. My salary afforded us comfort without excess. Annual vacations to places like Tuscany and Costa Rica, a reliable Honda and a practical Subaru in our garage, a healthy retirement fund that would ensure our future security. Jessica contributed her teacher's salary to our joint account without reservation, trusting that we were building something together that belonged to both of us equally. When we decided to start trying for a baby 2 years ago, it felt like the final piece of our perfect puzzle clicking into place. We had the house, the careers, the love, and the stability. We had planned everything so carefully, discussed every detail from nursery colors to college funds. The pregnancy test came back positive on a Tuesday morning in March, and I remember Jessica crying happy tears as she showed me the little pink plus sign. We were going to be parents. We were going to be a family. Everything was exactly as we dreamed it would be. How naive we were to think that dreams and reality operated by the same rules. Jessica's labor began at 3 a.m. on a cold November day, 6 days past her due date. I remember waking to her gentle touch on my shoulder, her voice calm despite the pain I could see building behind her eyes. "It's time," she whispered. And suddenly the months of preparation, the hospital bag by the door, the car seat installation I'd triple-checked, the route to Northwestern Memorial I'd practiced, all crystallized into this single moment. The delivery room at Northwestern Memorial felt both sterile and sacred, fluorescent lights casting everything in sharp relief while Jessica worked through 18 hours of labor with a strength that humbled me. I held her hand through contractions, fed her ice chips between pushes, and whispered encouragement that felt inadequate against the magnitude of what she was enduring. Her mother sat in the corner, knitting a baby blanket with nervous energy, while my parents waited in the hallway, too excited to sit still. When Michael David Chen finally emerged at 9:47 p.m., the room filled with that particular sound of relief and joy that only comes with new life. The doctor placed him on Jessica's chest, this tiny, wrinkled person we'd been anticipating for months, and my world shifted in ways I hadn't expected. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a healthy cry that announced his arrival to the world. Jessica was crying. I was crying. Even the nurse was wiping her eyes. But in that first moment of holding my son, something nagged at the edges of my consciousness. His skin tone seemed darker than I'd expected, a rich caramel color that didn't match what I thought our genetics would produce. Jessica's complexion was fair, almost porcelain, while mine was the typical pale tone of my Chinese-American heritage mixed with my mother's Irish background. I pushed the thought away immediately, ashamed of myself for even noticing, for letting doubt creep into what should have been pure joy. The birth certificate arrived 2 days later, official and permanent with its raised seal and careful calligraphy. Michael David Chen, born November 15, 2023, 7 pounds 3 ounces, 20 inches long. Parents, David Chen and Jessica Marie Chen. The document felt weighty in my hands, this legal proof of our son's existence and our roles as his parents. I stared at it longer than necessary, as if the official paperwork might explain away the questions that kept surfacing despite my attempts to suppress them. Jessica was exhausted in the way only new mothers can be. That bone-deep fatigue that comes from growing and delivering a human being. Her hair was limp against the hospital pillow, her face pale but radiant with the kind of love I'd never witnessed before. She held Michael with instinctive grace, as if motherhood was a language she'd always known but never had occasion to speak. Watching her nurse him, whisper to him, study his tiny features with wonder, I felt like an intruder in their perfect bubble. I decided to stay silent about my confusion. What kind of man questions his child's appearance in the first hours of life? What kind of father lets doubt overshadow love? Jessica needed support, not suspicion. Michael needed a father who was present and devoted, not distracted by genetics and percentages and the kind of mathematical thinking that had no place in a delivery room. So I pushed down the questions, smiled when visitors came, accepted congratulations with genuine gratitude, and told myself that love was more important than chromosomes. But late at night, when Jessica and Michael were sleeping peacefully beside me, the doubts returned like unwelcome guests. 3 days after we brought Michael home, I couldn't hold back the question any longer. We'd settled into our bedroom, Jessica propped against pillows with Michael sleeping in her arms. The afternoon light filtered through our sheer curtains, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floor. I'd taken the first photo of him that morning, a simple snapshot with my phone, him sleeping peacefully in his bassinet, tiny fists curled near his face. Looking at that image on my screen, the question that had been building inside me demanded an answer. "Jess?" I said quietly, sitting on the edge of our bed. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, careful and hesitant. "Can I ask you something about Michael?" She looked up from our son, her face soft with the dreamy contentment of new motherhood. "Of course. What is it?" I struggled with how to phrase what I was thinking without sounding accusatory or cruel. His skin tone, it's just darker than I expected. "I mean, looking at both of us, our families," I gestured vaguely, searching for words that wouldn't wound. "I'm just trying to understand the genetics." The change in Jessica's expression was immediate and devastating. The peaceful glow vanished, replaced by something cold and defensive that I'd never seen before. She pulled Michael closer to her chest as if protecting him from my words. Her eyes, which had been warm and tired, became sharp and angry. "What exactly are you asking me, David?" Her voice was low, dangerous in a way that made my stomach drop. "I'm not asking anything bad," I said quickly, realizing how wrong this was going. "I'm just confused about what?" She sat up straighter and I could see her whole body tensing. "About whether your son is actually your son? About whether I've been faithful to you? About whether I'm lying about something?" "No, that's not," I started, but she was already moving, standing up with Michael still in her arms. "Do you think I cheated on you?" The words came out like a roar, loud enough that Michael startled awake and began crying. Her face was flushed now, a red anger I'd never witnessed in 8 years together. "Do you think I would lie about the father of my child? Do you think I would put us through fertility treatments, through months of hoping and trying and failing, if this baby wasn't yours?" "Jessica, please, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She was pacing now, bouncing Michael gently despite her fury. "Explain to me what you meant when you questioned our son's skin color 3 days after I gave birth to him. Explain to me how that question could mean anything other than you don't trust me." I felt the conversation spiraling away from me. my attempt at honest communication becoming something ugly and hurtful. I trust you completely. I just noticed. You noticed what? That your son doesn't look white enough for you? That his skin is too dark to be yours? Her voice cracked on the last words, and I saw tears beginning to form. I can't believe you would say this to me. I can't believe you would look at our beautiful baby and think about genetics instead of love. The words hung between us like a wall neither of us knew how to breach. Michael's cries filled the silence, and Jessica turned away from me, walking toward the door. I need space, she said without looking back. I need to think about what kind of man I married. That night, for the first time in our relationship, we slept in separate rooms. The days that followed felt like living in a house made of glass. Every movement deliberate, every word measured, both of us afraid that the wrong gesture might shatter what remained of our relationship. Jessica and I communicated through text messages even when we were in the same room, our phones becoming intermediaries for conversations too painful to have face-to-face. Michael needs diapers would arrive on my screen while I sat 20 feet away in the living room. I'll pick some up after work, I'd type back. The formality of our exchanges highlighting how far we'd fallen from the easy intimacy we'd shared just days before. Thanks, would come the reply, followed by nothing but the sound of Michael's occasional cries and the careful footsteps of two people trying not to disturb each other's space. I'd taken to sleeping in our guest room, the one we'd planned to convert into a nursery before deciding Michael should sleep in our bedroom for the first few months. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sleeping in what should have been my son's room while my son slept with his mother in what used to be our shared sanctuary. The guest bed was too soft, the pillows wrong, everything about the space reminding me that I was no longer welcome in my own home. Jessica's protective behavior with Michael became more pronounced as the days passed. She seemed to position herself between us whenever I entered a room, as if my presence might somehow contaminate their bond. When I offered to help with feeding or changing, she'd accept with polite efficiency but no warmth, treating me like a helpful stranger rather than her husband and Michael's father. The isolation was suffocating. I found myself staying later at work, accepting projects that required travel, anything to avoid the careful choreography of our damaged household. My colleagues began to notice my distraction during meetings, my tendency to stare out conference room windows instead of focusing on blueprints and client presentations. Sarah Martinez, my project partner, pulled me aside after I'd missed 3 important details in a single morning. Everything okay at home with the new baby? She asked, her voice gentle with concern. Fine, I lied, because how do you explain that you've destroyed your marriage with a single question? Just adjusting to the sleep schedule. She nodded knowingly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. New fathers were tired, not hollow. They were overwhelmed with love, not consumed by questions they couldn't voice. Our friends began reaching out, eager to meet Michael and celebrate our new family. Jessica handled these interactions with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, scheduling visits when I was at work and deflecting questions about why I wasn't present. David's swamped with a new project, she'd say. Or he's running errands, explanations that sounded reasonable but felt like lies by omission. My parents called daily, excited about their first grandchild and full of questions about his development, his eating schedule, whether he looked more like Jessica or me. These conversations became exercises in careful navigation, my responses calculated to avoid revealing the crisis brewing in our home. He's beautiful, I'd tell them, which was true. Jessica's doing great, I'd add, which was partially true. We're all adjusting well, I'd conclude, which was completely false. The weight of maintaining these facades, of pretending our family was intact while feeling like a stranger in my own home, began affecting every aspect of my life. But what choice did I have? I'd opened this wound with my question, and now I had to live with the consequences. Unable to sleep in the guest room for the 4th night running, I found myself at my laptop at 2 a.m, typing questions into search engines that I was ashamed to ask out loud. The blue glow of the screen felt appropriate for this kind of desperate research, the kind that happens in darkness when rational thought gives way to obsessive need for answers. I started with basic genetics websites, reading about dominant and recessive traits, about how skin pigmentation worked across different ethnicities. The scientific articles were dense and clinical, full of terms like melanin production and polygenic inheritance that made me feel like I was studying for an exam I never wanted to take. I learned that skin color was influenced by multiple genes, that children could have complexions that varied significantly from their parents. The genetics was far more complex than the simple Punnett squares I remembered from high school biology. The genetics textbook I ordered from Amazon arrived 2 days later, a thick volume titled Human Heredity, Principles and Issues that felt weighty with the promise of answers. I hid it in my home office, reading chapters during lunch breaks and before dawn, highlighting passages about ethnic genetic variations and familial trait expression. The more I read, the more I realized how little I actually understood about inheritance patterns and genetic probability. But knowledge couldn't quiet the questions that had taken root in my mind. I found myself studying family photos with new intensity, looking for clues I might have missed before. My own background was straightforward enough. My father's family had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s, while my mother's Irish heritage traced back to County Cork. The combination had given me features that clearly reflected both backgrounds. Dark hair and eyes from my father's side, fair skin that burned easily from my mother's. Jessica's family history seemed equally clear in my memory. Her parents, Robert and Margaret, were both fair-skinned with light brown hair. Her younger brother Tim had the same coloring, as did her maternal grandparents whom I'd met at our wedding. During our 8 years together, I'd heard stories about German and English ancestors, about great-grandparents, who'd settled in the Midwest in the early 1900s. Nothing in those stories suggested the kind of genetic diversity that might explain Michael's darker complexion. Late one night, I found myself looking through our wedding album, studying the faces of Jessica's extended family gathered in her parents' backyard. There was her Aunt Linda from Milwaukee, Uncle James from Detroit, cousins whose names I'd forgotten but whose faces I remembered as uniformly fair. I felt like a detective searching for evidence in photos that had once represented nothing but joy and celebration. The internet offered darker possibilities too. Forums where men shared stories of paternity questions and DNA tests, of marriages destroyed by doubt and discoveries that changed everything. I read these accounts with morbid fascination, recognizing my own fears in their words while hoping desperately that my situation was different. Some of the stories ended with relief and apology, with genetic explanations that restored trust. Others ended with lawyers and custody arrangements and the kind of devastation that left families permanently broken. I began saving articles about genetic testing, bookmarking websites that offered discrete paternity analysis. Though I couldn't bring myself to actually order a kit, the very act of researching felt like a betrayal of Jessica and Michael. But I couldn't stop myself from gathering information like armor against the uncertainty that was consuming me. Knowledge, I told myself, was better than ignorance. But with each article I read, each genetic possibility I discovered, the simple question I'd asked Jessica seemed to grow into something larger and more complex than I'd ever intended. The following Saturday, Jessica's parents visited to meet their grandson for the first time. Robert and Margaret arrived with an armload of gifts and the kind of excitement that only new grandparents possess, their faces glowing with anticipation as they stepped through our front door. I watched Jessica transform in their presence, her guarded demeanor softening into something that resembled the woman I'd married, though she still maintained careful distance from me. "Oh, he's absolutely perfect," Margaret whispered as she held Michael for the first time, her eyes filling with tears. "Look at those beautiful dark eyes and that lovely complexion. He's going to be such a handsome boy." Robert peered over his wife's shoulder, his face creased with grandfatherly pride. "He definitely has the Morrison chin," he declared, referring to Margaret's maiden name. "And look at those long fingers. Maybe he'll be a pianist like my father." I seized the opportunity to ask casual questions about family genetics, framing my curiosity as new father interest rather than desperate need for answers. "It's fascinating how traits get passed down," I said, accepting a cup of coffee from Jessica. "Michael's coloring is so rich and beautiful. I'm trying to figure out where it comes from in our family trees." Margaret's expression shifted slightly, becoming more thoughtful as she continued studying Michael's features. "You know, it's funny you mention that. He reminds me of someone, but I can't quite place who." She looked up at her husband. "Robert, doesn't he look familiar to you?" "All babies look like Winston Churchill to me." Robert laughed, but I caught him studying Michael more carefully after his wife's comment. Later, while Jessica was napping and her parents were in the kitchen preparing dinner, I found Margaret looking through one of their old family photo albums that she'd brought to show Michael's baby pictures, alongside those of his mother and uncle. The album was thick with memories, pages of carefully preserved moments spanning decades of family gatherings and celebrations. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, sitting beside her on the couch, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but Jessica and I were talking about family history to share with Michael when he's older. Are there any relatives on your side that might account for his beautiful dark coloring?" Margaret's hands stilled on the album pages, and she was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up at me, there was something cautious in her expression that hadn't been there before. "David," she said slowly, "there are some family stories that Jessica might not have shared with you. Not because she was hiding anything, but because they were never discussed much when she was growing up. My heart began beating faster. What kind of stories? She turned to a page near the back of the album, pointing to a sepia-toned photograph of a woman I'd never seen before. The woman had dark hair and warm brown skin, her features beautiful and dignified despite the formal pose typical of early 20th century photography. "This is my grandmother's sister, Elena," Margaret said quietly. "She was adopted into the family when she was very young. We never knew much about her background, but family whispers suggested she might have had mixed heritage, possibly African American or Native American. This was in the 1920s, you understand, when such things weren't discussed openly." I stared at the photograph, seeing Michael's eyes reflected in Elena's face. The same warm complexion, the same proud bearing even in infancy. "Jessica doesn't know about Elena," Margaret continued. "It was considered family business that died with my grandmother's generation, but looking at Michael now, I think perhaps genetics have a longer memory than we do." That evening, after her parents had left with promises to return soon, I knew I had to tell Jessica about my conversation with her mother. The revelation about Elena felt like a key that might unlock the door between us, a way to bridge the chasm my question had created. I spent an hour crafting a letter by hand, something that felt more personal and deliberate than a text message or even spoken words that might come out wrong again. The handwritten letter felt weighty in my hands as I approached our bedroom door. Jessica was sitting in the rocking chair we'd bought for nursing, Michael sleeping peacefully in her arms. The soft lamplight made them both look ethereal, like a painting of Madonna and child that belonged in a museum rather than in our suddenly fragile home. "Jess," I said quietly, not wanting to wake Michael. "Could we talk? I have something I need to share with you." She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not the anger from a few days ago, but not warmth either. Something guarded and careful, as if she was preparing for another wound. "What is it?" she asked, her voice neutral. I sat down on the edge of our bed, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. "Your mother showed me something today. A family photo I'd never seen before." I held out the letter. "I wrote this because I wanted to make sure I said everything right. I've been thinking about our conversation, about my question, and I realize how it must have sounded to you." Jessica shifted Michael to one arm and took the letter, her eyes scanning the careful handwriting where I'd tried to explain my confusion, my research, my growing understanding that genetics were more complex than I'd realized. I'd written about Elena, about the family history that had been hidden for generations, about how learning this information had made me realize that my question came from ignorance rather than suspicion. "I wasn't questioning your faithfulness," I'd written. "I was questioning my own understanding of how families work, how traits pass down through generations, how much I didn't know about genetics and heritage and the beautiful complexity of who we are." As she read, I watched her face for any sign of softening, any indication that my words were reaching her. But instead of relief, I saw her expression harden further. "So you've been researching our son?" she said when she finished reading. "You've been studying genetics and talking to my mother about family history because you couldn't trust that Michael is yours? That's not—" I started, but she held up her hand. "You've been treating this like a science experiment, David. Like our family is a problem to be solved rather than a blessing to be cherished." She stood up, still holding Michael carefully. "Do you know what it feels like to have your husband question the paternity of your child? Do you understand that even if genetics explained everything, the fact that you needed an explanation at all is what's destroying us?" I felt the conversation slipping away from me again, my attempt at communication becoming another source of hurt. "I was trying to understand. You were trying to prove something," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You were looking for evidence instead of choosing trust. You were making our son's appearance about your doubts instead of about his beauty." She walked toward the door, pausing to look back at me with eyes that held more sadness than anger. "The problem isn't that you asked the question, David. The problem is that you needed to ask it at all." My annual performance review at Henderson & Associates was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I walked into the conference room knowing it wouldn't go well. The document in my supervisor's hands represented 3 months of distracted work, missed deadlines, and the kind of professional decline that happens when personal crisis bleeds into every aspect of life. James Henderson, the firm's founding partner, sat across from me with the careful expression of someone preparing to deliver unwelcome news. Sarah Martinez was there too, her presence both supportive and concerning. Sarah only attended reviews when there were serious issues to discuss. "David," James began, opening the folder that contained my evaluation, "we need to talk about your performance since Michael was born." I understand that becoming a new parent brings challenges, but we're seeing patterns that concern us. The review detailed everything I'd feared. The Riverside office complex project where I'd miscalculated load-bearing requirements, requiring expensive redesigns. The Morrison Healthcare Center proposal where I'd submitted incomplete environmental impact assessments, nearly costing us the contract. 3 client meetings where I'd been described as distracted and unprepared in their feedback forms. The Chen account specifically requested a different project manager, Sarah added gently, referring to an ironic coincidence. A family with my own surname who'd lost confidence in my abilities. They felt their needs weren't being heard. I stared at the performance metrics on the page, numbers that reflected the mathematical precision architecture demanded, but that I'd been unable to maintain. My billable hours were down 15%. Project completion rates had dropped significantly, and client satisfaction scores had fallen below the firm's standards for the first time in my 8-year tenure. I know I've been struggling, I admitted, the words feeling inadequate against the evidence spread before me. The adjustment to fatherhood has been more challenging than I expected. James leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. David, you've been one of our most reliable architects since you started here. The sustainable design work you've done has earned this firm recognition and awards, but we can't continue on this trajectory. What are you saying? We're placing you on a performance improvement plan, Sarah said, sliding another document across the table. 60 days to bring your work back to your usual standards. We're also reducing your project load temporarily and pairing you with mentorship support. The performance improvement plan felt like a scarlet letter, official documentation of my failure to maintain professional standards. It outlined specific metrics I needed to meet, deadlines for improvement, and the clear implication that failure to comply would result in termination. Reading through the requirements, I realized how far I'd fallen from the architect who'd been considered for partnership just months earlier. We want you to succeed, David, James said. Take advantage of our employee assistance program if you need counseling support. Many new parents struggle with work-life balance. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were offering counseling for work-life balance when my life at home had become a careful dance of avoidance, and my work had become an escape from problems I couldn't solve. How could I explain that my professional decline wasn't about sleep deprivation or time management, but about a single question that had shattered my understanding of trust and family? Walking back to my office, the performance review felt heavy in my briefcase, another artifact of how my doubt about Michael had rippled outward to damage every aspect of my carefully constructed life. I'd worked 8 years to build my reputation at this firm, and now it hung in the balance because I couldn't separate my personal crisis from my professional responsibilities. The worst part was knowing that my colleagues' concern was genuine. They wanted to help me succeed, but I couldn't tell them what was really wrong. That night, alone in the guest room with my performance review on the nightstand, I found myself staring at a marriage counseling brochure that had somehow made its way into our mail. The pamphlet promised communication skills for couples and rebuilding trust after crisis words that felt both hopeful and impossibly distant from where Jessica and I had ended up. I'd never called the number on that brochure. We'd never sought help, never tried to bridge our divide with professional guidance. Instead, we'd let pride and hurt create walls that seemed to grow higher each day. Looking at the cheerful couple on the cover, holding hands and smiling with the kind of confidence we'd once shared, I realized how naive I'd been about what love actually required. For 8 years, I'd believed that love was about compatibility and shared dreams, about building a life with someone whose goals aligned with yours. I'd thought love was about finding the right person, and then maintaining the relationship through good communication and mutual respect. What I hadn't understood was that love was also about faith, the kind of faith that doesn't require evidence or proof or genetic testing to validate its truth. My question about Michael's skin color had revealed something ugly about myself that I was only beginning to understand. It wasn't just about genetics or family history, or even trust in Jessica's faithfulness. It was about my fundamental inability to love without conditions, to embrace my family without needing them to fit my expectations or assumptions. I thought about the men I'd read about in those late-night internet forums, the ones who'd discovered through DNA tests that their children weren't biologically theirs. Some of those stories ended with devastation and divorce, with custody battles and broken families. But others ended differently, with men who realized that biology was less important than the love they'd already built, that fatherhood was defined by presence and commitment rather than chromosomes. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been asking the wrong question entirely. Instead of wondering whether Michael was genetically mine, I should have been asking whether I was capable of being the father he deserved. Instead of researching inheritance patterns and ethnic genetic variations, I should have been learning how to love unconditionally, how to choose my family every day regardless of what science might reveal. Jessica's hurt wasn't just about my doubt. It was about what that doubt revealed about the kind of husband and father I'd become. She'd carried our child for 9 months, endured 18 hours of labor, and was now navigating the overwhelming transition to motherhood. In that vulnerable moment when she needed my support most, I'd offered suspicion instead of celebration. Looking at Michael's baby photos on my phone, I saw not a puzzle to be solved, but a person who needed his father to be present and devoted. His dark eyes held the same curiosity and trust that all babies possessed, the same need for love and security that had nothing to do with genetic percentages. He was beautiful not because of where his features came from, but because he was ours, mine and Jessica's, in all the ways that actually mattered. The marriage counseling brochure remained unopened, but its presence felt like a reminder of opportunities missed and roads not taken. How different things might have been if I'd chosen trust over doubt, if I'd embraced the mystery of genetics rather than fearing it, if I'd understood that love required faith rather than proof. I'd spent weeks looking for answers in textbooks and family photos when the answer had been sleeping, 20 feet away in Jessica's arms all along. It was while cleaning out Jessica's desk drawer to find Michael's vaccination records that I discovered the medical files she'd never told me about. The manila folder was tucked beneath old tax returns and insurance documents, marked simply Northwestern Fertility in Jessica's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, knowing immediately that I was about to learn something that would change everything I thought I understood about our journey to parenthood. The medical records painted a story of struggle and determination that Jessica had hidden from me completely. For 8 months before our successful attempt at conception, she'd been seeing Dr. Patricia Williams at Northwestern Memorial's fertility clinic. The documents revealed a series of tests, consultations, and treatments that she'd undergone alone while I'd been blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. The first page detailed Jessica's initial consultation in March of 2022, where she'd expressed concerns about irregular cycles and difficulty conceiving, despite 6 months of trying. Blood work had revealed hormonal imbalances that could affect fertility, and Dr. Williams had recommended a series of interventions, including medication to regulate ovulation and lifestyle modifications to optimize conception chances. What struck me most painfully was the timeline. While I'd been working late on the Morrison Healthcare project, Jessica had been attending appointments twice a week, undergoing ultrasounds to monitor follicle development and receiving hormone injections that left her exhausted and emotional. The medical notes described side effects I now recognized: the headaches she'd attributed to stress, the mood swings I'd dismissed as normal premenstrual symptoms, the fatigue that had made her fall asleep on the couch most evenings. A particularly detailed report from July 2022 revealed that Jessica had experienced what the doctor termed secondary infertility anxiety, the fear that she might not be able to give me the family we'd planned together. The psychological evaluation noted her concerns about disappointing me, about failing in her role as a wife, about the pressure she felt to conceive naturally rather than admit she needed medical help. Patient expresses significant anxiety about informing spouse of fertility treatments. One note read, reports feeling shame about inability to conceive naturally, and fears that husband will view her as defective or inadequate. The words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been questioning Michael's paternity, Jessica had been carrying the secret shame of needing help to create him. She'd endured months of medical intervention, hormone treatments that made her feel sick and emotional, all while protecting me from the knowledge that our path to parenthood wasn't as simple as we'd hoped. The final report, dated October 2022, documented the successful implantation that had resulted in Michael's conception. Jessica had undergone intrauterine insemination with my sperm after careful timing, with ovulation-stimulating medications. The procedure had worked on the second attempt, and Dr. Williams had noted Jessica's relief and gratitude at finally achieving pregnancy. Reading through the insurance claims and appointment summaries, I realized that Jessica had paid for much of this treatment from her teaching salary, using money she'd saved for our vacation to Italy. She'd sacrificed financially and physically to give us the child we'd wanted, all while I remained oblivious to her struggle. The most devastating document was a handwritten note from Jessica to herself, dated the day before our successful conception. Please let this work. Please let me give David the family he deserves. Please don't let him think less of me if I can't do this naturally. Sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of Jessica's hidden struggle, I understood for the first time why my question about Michael's appearance had been so devastating. She'd fought through months of medical intervention to create our son, and my first response to his birth had been to question whether he was truly mine. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning in a plain white envelope that felt heavy with the weight of absolute truth. I'd ordered the paternity test 3 weeks earlier during a moment of desperate weakness, swabbing Michael's cheek while he slept, and submitting my own sample in secret. The laboratory envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 20 minutes before I found the courage to open it, my hands shaking as I tore through the seal that would either validate or destroy the last remnants of my doubt. The scientific language was clinical and definitive. The alleged father cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity is 99.97%. Below that, in bold letters that seemed to burn themselves into my vision, David Chen is the biological father of Michael Chen. I stared at the document until the words blurred together, feeling a complex mixture of relief, shame, and devastating regret. Michael was mine, biologically, genetically, unquestionably mine. Every doubt I'd harbored, every late-night internet search, every moment of suspicion had been based on nothing more than my own ignorance and inability to trust the woman I'd promised to love. Unconditionally, the test results included detailed genetic markers and inheritance patterns, scientific proof that Michael's darker complexion came from the complex interplay of genes inherited from both Jessica and me. The laboratory had identified genetic contributions that could be traced to various ethnic backgrounds, confirming what Margaret had revealed about Elena and demonstrating how traits could skip generations before expressing themselves in unexpected combinations. But the relief I'd expected to feel was overshadowed by crushing guilt. Holding this paper that vindicated Jessica completely, I realized the magnitude of what I'd done. I'd secretly tested our son's paternity, while my wife was struggling with the aftermath of difficult childbirth and the challenges of new motherhood. I'd chosen suspicion over support, doubt over devotion, scientific proof over emotional faith. The irony was devastating. The very test that proved Jessica's faithfulness also proved my faithlessness. While she'd been fighting to give us the family we'd dreamed of, I'd been questioning whether that family was real. While she'd been investing everything in our future together, I'd been investigating whether our present was built on lies. I thought about all the men in those online forums who'd received different results, who'd discovered that their suspicions were justified, and their relationships were built on deception. Some part of me had been prepared for that outcome, had even planned how I might react to confirmation of my doubts. But I'd never prepared for this, for the proof that the problem wasn't Jessica's honesty but my own capacity for trust. The document felt like evidence of my failure as a husband and father. Michael was mine in every way that genetics could measure, but I'd proven myself unworthy of him through my inability to love without conditions. Jessica had given me a son who carried my genes, my features, my biological legacy, and I'd responded by questioning her integrity and his legitimacy. Standing in our kitchen with the test results in my hands, I understood that I'd been solving the wrong problem entirely. The question was never whether Michael belonged to me. The question was whether I deserved to belong to him. The genetics were clear and irrefutable, but my character remained devastatingly uncertain. I folded the papers carefully and put them in my briefcase, knowing that this scientific validation couldn't undo the emotional damage I'd created. Proof of paternity couldn't repair broken trust or heal the wounds my doubt had inflicted. If anything, the test results made my behavior seem even more inexcusable. I'd hurt my family based on suspicions that had no foundation in reality. The annual Chen family Christmas photo had always been a source of pride for my parents, a formal portrait that documented our growing family and served as their holiday card to relatives scattered across the country. This year's photo session at the local department store became an exercise in carefully managed tension, with everyone trying to pretend that the obvious strain between Jessica and me was just normal new parent exhaustion. My mother, Linda, held Michael with the kind of reverence reserved for precious artifacts, but I noticed how she kept studying his features with an expression I'd never seen before. She'd always been direct about family resemblances, pointing out how my cousin's daughter had my father's eyes, how my brother looked exactly like our grandfather at the same age. But with Michael, her comments were careful and diplomatic. "He's such a beautiful baby," she said to Jessica, her voice warm but somehow measured. "Those gorgeous dark eyes will break hearts someday." My father, Robert, was less subtle in his examination. During the photo session, I caught him comparing Michael's complexion to mine in ways that felt uncomfortably familiar. The same kind of genetic analysis I'd been doing myself. When the photographer suggested various family groupings, my father seemed reluctant to be photographed holding Michael, claiming his hands were too shaky to hold a baby safely. Maybe David should hold him for the father-son shots, he suggested, though he'd never hesitated to hold my brother's children at similar ages. The group photo that resulted felt like a lie preserved in professional lighting. There we were, 3 generations of Chens arranged in perfect composition, everyone smiling at the camera while carefully avoiding the questions that hung unspoken in the air. Jessica sat beside me with practiced grace, her smile genuine when looking at Michael, but strained when the photographer asked us to look at each other. Jessica's family had drawn protective lines that became increasingly obvious during holiday gatherings. Margaret continued to be warm and loving with Michael, but her interactions with me had cooled considerably. She'd answer my questions politely, but no longer initiated conversations. No longer included me in the easy banter that had characterized our relationship for 8 years. Robert was more direct in his disapproval. During Christmas dinner at their house, he made several pointed comments about the importance of trusting family, about how doubt could poison relationships that took years to build. When I offered to help clean up after dinner, he suggested I spend time with Michael instead, as if my parenting required additional emphasis. A father's first job is to love his child unconditionally, he said. The words clearly directed at me, though he never made eye contact. Everything else is just details. Jessica's brother Tim, who'd always treated me like a favorite relative, now maintained polite distance. He'd play with Michael enthusiastically, but include me in their interactions only when directly prompted by Jessica. The easy camaraderie we'd shared during previous family gatherings had been replaced by careful civility that felt worse than outright hostility. The most painful moments came when well-meaning relatives made innocent comments about family resemblances. Jessica's Aunt Linda mentioned how Michael reminded her of someone but couldn't place who, unknowingly echoing the same confusion that had started this entire crisis. Each time someone studied Michael's features or commented on his beautiful coloring, I felt the weight of my question and its consequences. Looking at that family photo now, I see what everyone else must have seen. A baby caught between adults who'd let their own fears and doubts overshadow the simple joy of new life. Michael's innocent expression stands in stark contrast to the careful smiles surrounding him, a reminder of how much damage can be done when love becomes conditional on understanding rather than acceptance. The conversation happened on a Sunday morning in February, 3 months after Michael's birth, when the winter light filtering through our bedroom curtains felt as cold and distant as everything else in our house had become. Jessica sat on the edge of our bed, the bed I hadn't shared with her since that first explosive night, with Michael sleeping peacefully in her arms and an expression on her face that I recognized as resigned. "Determination, David," she said quietly, not looking at me directly. "I think you should move out for a while." The words hit me even though I'd been expecting them for weeks. Our careful choreography of avoidance had become unsustainable, the tension in our house so thick it felt like a third person living with us. I'd been sleeping in the guest room for months. We communicated primarily through notes left on the kitchen counter, and even Michael seemed to sense the discord, crying more frequently and sleeping less peacefully than the baby book suggested was normal. "How long is a while?" I asked, sitting down in the chair across from her. "I don't know," she admitted, finally meeting my eyes. "I just know that I can't keep living like this. Michael deserves better than parents who can barely look at each other. I deserve better than a husband who sees me as someone who needs to be investigated rather than trusted." Her voice was steady, but I could see the toll these months had taken on her. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her face was drawn with exhaustion that went beyond normal new mother fatigue, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed to have settled permanently into her features. "I never meant for it to go this far," I said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "But it did go this far," she replied. "And I can't pretend anymore that we can just get past this without acknowledging how fundamentally it's changed things between us." She'd already researched apartments, she told me, and had found a furnished one-bedroom place near my office that was available for month-to-month rental. The practical efficiency with which she'd planned my departure felt more devastating than anger would have been. It suggested that she'd been thinking about this separation for weeks, that she'd moved past hoping we could repair things quickly. "What about Michael?" I asked, though I knew Jessica would never keep me from my son. "He needs his father," she said firmly. This isn't about punishing you or taking him away from you. This is about giving us space to figure out if we can rebuild what we had, or if we need to accept that we can't. The apartment lease agreement she handed me was already filled out with my information, requiring only my signature to make our separation official. The document felt heavier than it should have. This simple contract that would formalize the breakdown of everything we'd built together. 12 months ago, we'd been planning Michael's nursery and choosing names. Now we were dividing our lives into separate addresses. "I'll pack some things tonight," I said, signing the lease with hands that shook slightly. "Take your time," Jessica replied, though we both knew there was nothing left to take time with. The decision had been made, the apartment secured, the legal paperwork completed. All that remained was the physical act of moving my belongings and accepting that the family I'd questioned was now broken in ways that might be irreparable. That night, as I packed my clothes into suitcases for the first time since our honeymoon, I understood that some questions, once asked, can never be unasked. Some doubts, once voiced, can never be completely erased. And some trust, once broken, requires more than good intentions to rebuild. The one-bedroom apartment felt like a confession booth made of drywall and cheap carpet, a space where I could finally confront the man I'd become without witnesses or distractions. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the therapist I'd found through my company's employee assistance program, had an office that smelled faintly of lavender and contained the kind of comfortable furniture that invited difficult conversations. Her session notes, which she kept in a leather portfolio during our weekly meetings, became a record of my slow, painful journey toward understanding myself. "Tell me about the moment you first questioned Michael's appearance," Dr. Hendricks had said during our second session, her pen poised over the notepad where she documented my responses with careful precision. "I was holding him," I'd answered, remembering that afternoon in the hospital. "He was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy cry. But his skin tone seemed darker than I expected." "What did you expect?" she'd asked, and the question had stopped me cold. Through weeks of sessions, Dr. Hendricks helped me excavate the assumptions I'd never examined, the unconscious biases that had shaped my reaction to my son's appearance. I'd grown up in a predominantly white suburb, attended private schools, where diversity was something discussed in social studies class rather than lived experience. My understanding of genetics and heredity had been limited to high school biology and casual observations about family resemblances. "You've described your love for Jessica as unconditional," Dr. Hendricks noted during our fourth session. "But your reaction to Michael suggests that your love had conditions you weren't aware of." The sessions forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my character. I'd prided myself on being progressive and open-minded, but when faced with my son's unexpected appearance, my first instinct had been suspicion rather than wonder. I'd claimed to trust Jessica completely, but my question revealed that my trust was contingent on her meeting my expectations rather than being absolute. "What do you think Jessica needed from you in that moment?" Dr. Hendricks asked during a particularly difficult session. "Support," I'd answered immediately. "Celebration. Love. And what did you give her instead?" "Doubt," I'd admitted, the word tasting bitter. I gave her doubt when she needed certainty. The therapy sessions also helped me understand the deeper implications of my research and secret paternity test. My desperate need for scientific proof had been less about genetics and more about my inability to love without guarantees. I'd been treating my family like a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be cherished. "Consider this," Dr. Hendricks had said during our 8th session. "Even if the paternity test had revealed different results, how would that have changed your responsibility to Michael? How would it have changed the love he deserved?" The question had haunted me for days. I realized that my focus on biological connection had been a way of avoiding the harder work of emotional connection. Being a father wasn't about DNA percentages. It was about showing up every day, choosing love over fear, embracing the mystery and beauty of the person your child was becoming. Through individual therapy, I began to understand that my question about Michael's appearance had revealed fundamental flaws in my capacity for unconditional love. I'd been a husband and father in fair weather, but when faced with the unexpected, I'd chosen investigation over trust, proof over faith. The session notes in Dr. Hendricks' portfolio documented not just my problems, but my gradual growth, my slow journey toward becoming the kind of man who could love his family without conditions or qualifications. After 3 months of therapy and painful self-reflection, I knew I needed to write Jessica a letter that went beyond explanation or defense. one that took full responsibility for the damage I'd caused. The apology letter took me 17 drafts, over 2 weeks, each version forcing me to dig deeper into acknowledging not just what I'd done wrong, but who I'd failed to be when she needed me most. The final version, written by hand on the good stationery we'd received as a wedding gift, felt like the most important document I'd ever created. Dear Jessica, I've spent 3 months in therapy, trying to understand how I became the kind of man who would question his son's paternity instead of celebrating his birth. What I've learned is that my doubt wasn't really about genetics or family history. It was about my own inability to love without conditions. When I asked about Michael's appearance, I was revealing something broken in myself that I hadn't even recognized. I was showing you that my love required proof, that my trust needed validation, that my commitment to our family was contingent on my understanding rather than absolute regardless of mystery. You needed a husband who would stand beside you without question, especially after everything you'd endured to give us the family we wanted. Instead, I gave you suspicion when you deserved celebration, investigation when you needed support. I treated our son like a puzzle to be solved, rather than a miracle to be embraced. I know now about the fertility treatments you underwent alone, the shame you carried about needing help to conceive, the fear that I might think less of you if I knew. While you were fighting to create our family, I was questioning whether it was real. The depth of my failure as your partner is something I'm still learning to comprehend. I cannot undo the hurt I've caused, or take back the question that started this crisis. I cannot erase the doubt I planted in your heart about my character, or the trust I broke at the moment you were most vulnerable. But I can tell you that I've done the work to understand why I failed you, and I'm committed to becoming the man you and Michael deserve. This isn't an attempt to manipulate your forgiveness or rush your healing. You have every right to remain angry, to protect yourself and Michael from further hurt, to decide that what we had cannot be rebuilt. Whatever you choose, I will respect and support. But if you're willing to consider the possibility of healing, I would like the chance to show you that I can love you and Michael the way you've always deserved. Completely, unconditionally, without requiring proof or explanation or genetic validation. I love you, Jessica. I love Michael. And I'm finally learning what that love actually means. David. When I delivered the letter to our house, Jessica accepted it with the careful neutrality that had characterized all our interactions since the separation. She didn't read it while I was there, didn't offer immediate response or reaction. Instead, she simply thanked me for bringing it and said she would consider what I'd written. 3 days later, she called me at my apartment. Your letter, she said without preamble. It's the first time you've taken responsibility without making excuses or asking me to understand your perspective. Because there are no excuses, I replied, and understanding my perspective isn't your job. Changing my behavior is mine. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I think we should try couples counseling. Not because I'm ready to forgive everything, but because I want to see if the man who wrote this letter can show up consistently, not just when he's trying to fix what he broke. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility, and after months of certainty that I'd destroyed everything worth saving, possibility felt like the beginning of hope. Dr. Susan Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, specialized in couples therapy and had an office that felt designed for difficult conversations. Her approach was direct but compassionate, and she made it clear from our first session that rebuilding trust would require both of us to do work we'd never done before. The new family photo she encouraged us to take after 2 months of successful counseling became a symbol of the tentative hope we were building together. Trust isn't something you rebuild, Dr. Chen explained during our 3rd session. Trust is something you build new from the ground up, with better materials and a stronger foundation. The early sessions were brutal. Jessica spoke about the loneliness of undergoing fertility treatments alone, the shame she'd carried about needing medical help to conceive, and the devastating blow of having her motherhood questioned just days after giving birth. I learned that my secret research and paternity test had felt like additional betrayals, evidence that I was more committed to proving her wrong than supporting her through the challenges of new parenthood. When David questioned Michael's appearance, Jessica said during our 5th session, it felt like he was questioning everything about who I am as a person. My faithfulness, my honesty, my worth as a mother. Dr. Chen helped me understand that Jessica's experience as a woman with mixed heritage, which she'd only learned about through her mother's revelation, had shaped her reaction to my question in ways I'd never considered. She'd grown up fielding subtle questions about her background, dealing with people who made assumptions about her ethnicity based on her appearance, and navigating a world where her identity was often subject to others' interpretations. When you questioned Michael's skin color, Dr. Chen said to me, "You were participating in the same kind of racial questioning that Jessica has faced her entire life. You became another person who couldn't accept her family's appearance without explanation." This revelation transformed my understanding of why my question had been so devastating. It wasn't just about trust between spouses. It was about the racial assumptions and biases that I'd unconsciously brought into our most intimate relationship. Jessica had needed me to celebrate Michael's beautiful dark skin, not question where it came from. Through months of counseling, we learned new ways to communicate that didn't rely on assumptions or defensiveness. Jessica shared more about her experiences with racial microaggressions, helping me understand how my question had activated a lifetime of painful encounters with people who couldn't accept her identity without investigation. I learned to listen without trying to fix or explain, to sit with her pain without making it about my guilt. The goal isn't to forget what happened, Dr. Chen reminded us repeatedly. The goal is to use what happened to build something stronger. We established new traditions and approaches to parenting that honored Michael's complex heritage. We researched Elena's family history together, learning about the courage it had taken for a mixed-race woman to raise a family in 1920s America. We talked about how to prepare Michael for a world that might question his identity, how to give him pride in all the cultures that contributed to who he was. The photograph we took during our 6th month of counseling shows a family that looks different from our wedding picture, more cautious perhaps, but also more genuine. Jessica's smile is smaller but more real, my expression less confident but more present. Michael, now sitting up and grinning with 2 tiny teeth, represents not just our biological connection, but our commitment to loving him unconditionally, regardless of what genetics or family history might reveal. We were building something new, something stronger, something worthy of the beautiful, complex child who had inadvertently saved our marriage by nearly destroying it. Michael's first birthday party invitation, designed with bright primary colors and featuring a photo of our son's radiant smile, felt like a celebration of more than just his trip around the sun. As I addressed envelopes to family and friends, I realized we were inviting people to witness not just Michael's growth, but our transformation as a family that had learned to love without conditions. The party itself was held in our backyard on a perfect October afternoon, exactly 11 months after that devastating night when my question had shattered everything we thought we knew about trust and family. Jessica had moved back home 3 months earlier, after we'd successfully completed 8 months of couples therapy, and I'd demonstrated consistent growth in individual counseling. We weren't the same people who'd brought Michael home from the hospital. We were better versions of ourselves, scarred but stronger. Michael, now walking with unsteady determination and babbling in the kind of joyful gibberish that made everyone smile, was the center of attention in ways that had nothing to do with his appearance. He toddled between relatives with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted his place in the world, his dark eyes bright with curiosity and mischief. Watching him explore his birthday party with fearless enthusiasm, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the chance to be his father. My parents, who'd attended several family therapy sessions with us, interacted with Michael with the natural affection they'd always shown their grandchildren. The careful distance they'd maintained in those early months had been replaced by the kind of love that asked no questions and required no explanations. My mother spent most of the party following Michael around with her camera, capturing every expression and milestone. Jessica's family had also made the journey toward acceptance and healing. Margaret brought the photo album that contained Elena's picture, sharing the story with our extended family and explaining how genetics could carry beauty across generations in unexpected ways. Robert gave a toast that acknowledged both the joy of Michael's first year and the growth our entire family had experienced. To Michael, he said, raising his glass of lemonade, who taught us that love isn't about understanding everything, it's about embracing the mystery and beauty of the people we're blessed to call family. The transformation in Jessica was perhaps the most remarkable. The guarded defensiveness that had characterized our interactions for months had been replaced by a confidence that came from knowing she was truly seen and valued. She'd learned to trust again, not because I'd proven myself worthy, but because she'd decided that love required the courage to be vulnerable, despite the possibility of future hurt. "Look at him," she said to me as we watched Michael demolish his birthday cake with enthusiastic abandon. "Look at our beautiful boy." The possessive pronoun felt like a gift, Not my son or your son, but our son, a child who belonged to both of us equally and completely. Michael's first birthday represented not just his growth, but our evolution into parents who could love him for exactly who he was, not who we'd expected him to be. As the party wound down and we cleaned frosting from Michael's face, I reflected on how much we'd learned about the nature of family. Love wasn't about genetic percentages or expected appearances. It was about showing up every day, choosing faith over fear, embracing mystery over demanding explanations. That night, as Jessica and I put Michael to bed together for the first time in nearly a year, I understood that some questions, once asked, can lead to better answers than we ever imagined possible. Our family had been broken and rebuilt, and in the rebuilding, we'd discovered what it really meant to love unconditionally. Michael David Chen was ours, not because of DNA tests or family resemblances, but because love makes families, and we'd finally learned how to love the way families deserve.